The Iranian Revolution, How Iran Rewrote Its Destiny. What if I told you that one of the world's most powerful monarchs was toppled not by guns, but by cassette tapes? That an aging cleric in exile plotted a revolution from a rented house in France, and won? That one of the richest nations in the Middle East spiraled from imperial splendor into full-blown revolution not once, not twice, but 3 times in less than a century? How did a Shia sect survive centuries of persecution to become the core of an Islamic state? Why did Persian merchants and clerics fight side by side for democracy, only for it to crumble into chaos? What happens when a country's greatest export is oil and revolution? This is not just the story of 1979. This is the wild, oil-slicked, blood-stained, and turban-tangled saga of modern Iran. A saga that begins not with Khomeini, but with kings in silk robes, bazaars buzzing with rebellion, and global empires carving up Persia like it was the last piece of baklava on the plate. By the end of this video, you won't just understand what happened. You'll be asking yourself, did it ever really end? Before we get to the revolutions, we need to meet the dynasty that rewrote Iran's religious DNA, the Safavids, 1501 to 1736. These folks weren't just monarchs, they were mystics with a mission. Founder, Shahs, a teenage warrior poet who declared Shia Islam the state religion in 1501. Why? Partly religious conviction, partly political chess. Why Shia? Because the Safavids were surrounded by Sunni rivals, especially the mighty Ottoman Empire. Declaring Shiism was like painting a giant, not Ottoman sign across Persia. How? Through a mix of persuasion, coercion, and good old-fashioned violence. Sunni clerics were purged, Shia scholars were imported, and the population was gradually converted. Legacy: Iran became the only major Shia-majority country in the Islamic world, a status it still holds today. Fast forward to the Qajar dynasty, 1789 to 1925, a royal house that ruled with pomp but not much circumstance. They were autocrats who loved European luxuries and foreign loans more than their own people. Foreign meddling. The Qajars sold off Iran's resources like they were on clearance. Tobacco? Sold to the British. Oil? Leased to the British. National pride? Pawned to the Russians. Religious and secular discontent. Clerics were furious about foreign influence. Merchants, bazaars were losing business to European imports. Intellectuals wanted reform. Everyone was mad. Trigger warning, enlightenment ahead. What sparked it? A merchant was beaten by the Shah's men for price gouging. The public erupted. Clerics and merchants took sanctuary in mosques. Protests spread like wildfire. What they wanted: a constitution, a parliament, an end to arbitrary rule. You know, the basics. Victory. In 1906, the Shah caved and signed a constitution. The Majlis, parliament, was born. Cue fireworks and cautious optimism. But wait, plot twist. The new Majlis was a hot mess. Liberals, conservatives, secularists, and clerics all wanted different things. Unity? Not so much. Backlash. Muhammad Ali Shah, the next Qajar monarch, hated the Majlis. In 1908, he bombarded the parliament with Russian help. Yes, literally shelled it. That made him unpopular. Aftermath. Civil war. The Shah was deposed in 1909, but the revolution's dream of democracy was already fraying. We'll get to the 1979 revolution soon, but first, oil. Enter Mohammad Mossadegh, a charismatic nationalist who became prime minister in 1951. His big move: he nationalized Iran's oil industry, kicking out the British-owned Anglo-Iranian oil company, now BP. The West was not amused. The coup. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 orchestrated a coup, Operation Ajax, to remove Mossadegh and restore the Shah's power. Democracy? Crushed. Oil? Reclaimed by the West. Result: the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, became an absolute monarch backed by the US, with a secret police, SAVAK, that made dissent painful. By the 1970s, Iran was a pressure cooker. The Shah's regime: lavish, authoritarian, and tone-deaf. He spent oil money on weapons and palaces while inflation soared and poverty spread. The opposition: a strange alliance of Islamists, Marxists, students, and bazaars. Their common enemy: the Shah. The Ayatollah, Ruhollah Khomeini, exiled cleric turned revolutionary icon. His cassette sermons were smuggled into Iran like bootleg Beatles albums. The spark: in 1978, protests erupted. The Shah tried reforms, then repression. Neither worked. The climax: in January 1979, the Shah fled. In February, Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome. By April, Iran voted to become an Islamic republic. Let's rewind for a moment. Why did the Safavids choose Shiism? The core dispute. After Prophet Muhammad's death, Sunnis believed leadership should go to the most qualified. Shia believed it should stay in the Prophet's family, specifically through Ali, his cousin and son-in-law. The martyrdom of Hussein, Ali's son, Husayn ibn Ali, was killed at Karbala in 680 CE by the Umayyad Caliphate. Shia see this as a symbol of injustice and betrayal. The Safavid strategy. By embracing Shiism, the Safavids distinguished themselves from their Sunni Ottoman rivals and created a unique Persian identity. Now Britain and Russia looked at Persia and said, "Mine." In 1907, they signed the Anglo-Russian Convention, slicing Persia into spheres of influence like a colonial cake. Russia got the north, Britain the south, and the poor Persians got the middle, a neutral zone. How generous. Then came World War I, and despite Persia's official neutrality, its land became a chessboard for the British, Russians, and Ottomans. The Qajar dynasty, already wobbling like a three-legged stool, could only watch as foreign troops trampled their sovereignty. But the real tragedy? Famine and disease. Between 1917 and 1919, up to 2 million Iranians died, a quarter of the population, due to war-induced food shortages, hoarding, and the Spanish flu. Some historians call it a genocide of neglect. Others call it imperial collateral damage. Either way, it was catastrophic too. The constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1911 was Iran's flirtation with democracy. It birthed the Majlis, parliament, a constitution, and a glimmer of hope. But alas, it was a revolution with commitment issues. The Qajar monarchy remained, foreign meddling continued, and the Majlis was often more symbolic than sovereign. Still, the revolution discredited the Qajars, and into this power vacuum marched a man with a big mustache and even bigger ambitions. Reza Khan. Reza Khan staged a coup in 1921 and became Reza Shah Pahlavi in 1925. He was a man on a mission: modernize Iran or bust. He built railways, secular schools, and a centralized army. He banned the veil, sidelined the clergy, and even changed the country's name from Persia to Iran in 1935 to emphasize its pre-Islamic Aryan roots. But here's the rub: he was an autocrat. Meritocracy was great, unless it threatened his throne. He crushed dissent, muzzled the press, and ruled with an iron fist. His disdain for Shia clerics and Islam in general alienated the religious class, who were biding their time. And then came World War II. Fearing Reza Shah might cozy up to Nazi Germany, he admired their efficiency. Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran in 1941, deposed him, and installed his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, a more pliable monarch. Enter Mohammad Mossadegh, a nationalist prime minister with a flair for drama and a PhD in sticking it to the British. In 1951, he nationalized Iran's oil industry, kicking out the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, now BP. The British were livid, the Americans were nervous, and the Shah, he was hiding in Rome. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 orchestrated Operation Ajax, a coup that ousted Mossadegh and restored the Shah's power. It was the first CIA-backed regime change of the Cold War, and it worked. The Shah returned, grateful and emboldened. With Western backing, the Shah launched the White Revolution, a top-down modernization blitz. It included land reform, breaking up feudal estates and giving land to peasants; women's rights, including the right to vote, symbolic, since the Shah ruled by decree; education and healthcare, especially in rural areas; industrialization, new roads, factories, and infrastructure. It was dazzling on paper, but in practice, the Majlis was toothless. The Savak, his secret police, made sure no one got too mouthy. The wealth gap widened and oil profits enriched the elite and foreign companies. Clerics were sidelined, and traditionalists were alienated. The Shah was building a modern state, but not a just one. Meanwhile, the oil-slicked corridors of 1960s Iran, the Shah was busy polishing his crown and launching the White Revolution, a series of reforms that promised land to peasants, votes to women, and a big ol' middle finger to the Shia clergy. While some reformists were momentarily dazzled by the glitter of petrodollars, the clerics were not so easily bought. They saw the Shah's reforms not as progress, but as a secular Trojan horse galloping straight into the heart of Islam. Enter stage left, Ruhollah Khomeini, a politically savvy cleric with a penchant for fiery sermons and a deep distrust of monarchy. After publicly denouncing the Shah's reforms, he was exiled to Iraq, where he did what any revolutionary would do. He wrote a book. In Najaf, he developed the theory of velayat-e-faqih, guardianship of the jurist, a system where secular governments would be tossed out like expired yogurt, and senior clerics, conveniently including the. Meanwhile, back in Iran, the economy, built on oil and optimism, was starting to wobble. Turns out, relying on oil money while ignoring inflation, inequality, and political repression is a bit like building a palace on quicksand. The youth were unemployed, the middle class was disillusioned, and the Savak, the Shah's secret police, were everywhere, like a very unhelpful version of Santa Claus. Khomeini's cassette sermons, smuggled into Iran like revolutionary mixtapes, began to resonate. By 1978, the Shah, under pressure from the US, which was suddenly having second thoughts about its autocratic BFF, allowed the freedom movement of Iran to reorganize. But it was too little, too late. The revolution was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. In August 1978, protests erupted against Savak. The Shah responded with martial law. In September, protests erupted against martial law. You see the pattern. Khomeini, now exiled in France and giving interviews like a revolutionary rock star, became the face of the movement. By December, parts of the Iranian army, trained and armed by the West, began to defect. The Shah, sensing the end, fled to Egypt in January 1979. On February 1st, Khomeini returned to Iran to a hero's welcome. But the revolution wasn't over, it was just changing costumes. Initially, a provisional government led by Democrat Mehdi Bazargan took the reins. But Khomeini, with the crowd behind him and the Shah gone, was the real power behind the curtain. Soon, a new constitution was drafted. It included a president and a parliament, Majlis, but also a supreme leader, a position created just for Khomeini, with sweeping powers over religion, politics, and society. To keep things tidy, a new assembly of experts, a group of Shia clerics, was tasked with selecting future supreme leaders. And to make sure no pesky laws slipped through, a guardian council, half of whom were appointed by the supreme leader, was created to veto legislation. Checks and balances? More like checks and turbans. Throughout the 20th century, Iranians proved they had a low tolerance for tyranny. From the 1906 constitutional revolution to the 1953 coup and the 1979 uprising, they repeatedly stood up to kings, coups, and clerics alike. Whether the Islamic Republic will endure another 40 years is a question only time. And the Iranian people can answer. Meanwhile, across the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia's monarchy still stands tall, oil-rich, and reform-resistant. But history has a funny way of repeating itself, especially in the Middle East. If you enjoyed this tale of turbans, turmoil, and tape cassettes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the dramas of history. Want to explore how the Assembly of Experts works, or what happened to Bazargan after the revolution? I've got more stories where this came from. Just say the word.